Cool. So my name is Anna Rose Craig. I work for the American Friends Service Committee, and I also work with the Down GEO Aurora campaign. So again, thank you so much for being here. This is a press conference to commemorate and highlight our second community accountability report, which we have worked on using complaints and testimonies from people who have been detained at GEO Aurora from late September of 2025 up until early February of 2026. So just to give a very brief overview of the Down GEO campaign and our demands, we're obviously going to get into a lot more details around this report. But broadly speaking, our campaign is made up of individuals and organizations across the Denver metro area, and we are fighting to close the Aurora immigrant detention facility. And the reason that this campaign exists in this moment specifically is because the contract for this facility expires in October of 2026. And so this campaign has existed in this more formal format since September of 2024. And so today we are here to highlight the work that we have been doing in the last 4 months, specifically with this community accountability report. So we are just going to briefly introduce the organizations that have worked on this report, and then we'll get into some of the details related to the report. So I'll pass it to Piper to introduce AFSC.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Piper, and I work for the American Friends Service Committee. Our organization is a Quaker-based organization that has been working on issues of migration since World War II. But here in Colorado, our work really began in 2007 when this facility was set to expand from just around 500 beds to over 1,500 beds. And when we learned about that expansion, we learned so much about detention and committed to one another never to let it go on in the shadows ever again, and to work to either better conditions or eventually we decided it had to close. I'm really excited to be a part of this campaign and to have launched it together with the rest of the organizations on the call year before last in 2024. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Andrea from Casa de Paz to speak a little bit about their organization.
Thank you, Piper. My name is Andrea Loya. I use she, her, ella pronouns. The executive director at Casa de Paz. Casa de Paz focuses on the folks who are currently detained and then really released from the Aurora Detention Center. We are unique in that, we have a commissary program, a letter writing program, a visitation program, most recently phone funds for detention, and a snack bag program outside of the detention center that promotes both the rapid response network line and then other community resources. We are committed to the Down GEO Coalition. We understand that there's nothing that really comes from bettering the conditions inside of detention. It really just band-aids a lot of the abuse and harm that the system is really meant to perpetuate. So we're really thankful for the huge effort that Hand put into this report and just amazing work that is on there. And honestly, just really, really it's incredible to be a partner in that way to what they've produced. So super thankful. And I'm not really supposed to, I don't know who I'm supposed to pass it to, so I'll go ahead and pass it back to Ark.
Thank you, Andrea. We'll pass it to V with Hand just to introduce your organization.
Hello, good morning. My name is V. Reeves. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm an organizer with House Keys Action Network Denver, or HAND. We are a housing justice, racial justice organization. We were heavily involved in the creation of this report and are looking forward to continued collaboration with the incredible organizations that are part of the Down GEO Coalition. And in a little bit, I'm going to talk more about our connection to this campaign. So thank you so much for being present, and very grateful to work with the orgs that have been doing this work for so long.
Thank you, V. And lastly, we'll pass it to Alejandra with Aurora Unidos CSO.
Hi everyone, I'm Alejandra. I'm a volunteer with Aurora Unidos CSO. We're an organization that fights for Chicano liberation, and we envision a world where immigration is understood as a fundamental human right. And so, we're very happy to be here.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to briefly talk about the growth of this campaign in the last 4 months since the release of our first community accountability report. A lot has changed in that time here in Colorado and in Aurora and Denver and also around the country. And we've seen that in our campaign as well. In December, we officially launched our Aurora Listening Project, which is an effort to do story collection and deep canvassing work around Aurora and East Denver and with the people that are most affected by the existence of this facility. So we've been able to interview individuals in a more in-depth way for at least an hour to understand their experiences inside the facility and to also allow them to tell their own stories in the way that they want their stories to be told. And additionally, with that effort, we have done some door knocking around Aurora to connect with neighbors and people who live near the facility to spread awareness and also importantly to understand what they might need or want in their communities that could go in the place of this facility. And that is a big part of the work that our campaign does with this door knocking effort and also with listening sessions for neighbors who live in Aurora and East Denver. We do want to understand what folks would like to see in their neighborhoods and communities and what sorts of resources they might be lacking that could replace this facility. And so those are just some highlights. We've also met with Aurora City Council members multiple times in the last 4 months, as well as staff and representatives themselves, including Representative Jason Crow and staff from Diana DeGette's office and Michael Bennett's office. So we really have grown a lot, and you can see that in this report as well, and the amount of information that we are able to access to write this report. So I want to pass it over to V to talk about the role of house keys in this coalition and in this report writing, and then give us an overview of the methodology for this report.
Thank you so much. HAND, as a housing justice, racial justice organization, has been working very closely with the migrant community. There is a lot of crossover that we experience in terms of undocumented folks facing additional barriers when it comes to attaining housing. Additionally, very concerningly so, the detention center in Aurora, run by GEO, has posters in the waiting room that refer to the detention center as housing, saying things like telephones provided in housing, game room in housing. So immediately, the language around detention is making this shift towards accepting it as housing for a particular group of people. We as house keys are very adamant that housing needs to have safety, security, privacy, and dignity. And none of those aspects are present when it comes to immigrant detention. We also know that detention rips people away from their communities. A lot of the times, the folks that are targeted by ICE in raids happen to be people who are at work sites or heading to and from work. And the effect of that has been a huge increase in family unshelteredness or family houselessness. This happens because when the breadwinner is detained, a lot of the times that leaves a spouse with children left to fend for themselves and without resources to be able to continue paying the rent. So because of that, HAND has been very heavily involved in supporting many of those families that have been impacted directly by detention and deportation. Additionally, we see that billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars are put into funding this detention deportation machine. And we advocate alongside the Shutdown GEO Coalition for that funding to be used on public goods and things that could be used to heal our community rather than hurt and imprison them. And so we ask for divestment of those funds to instead support goods like housing for all, as well as employment support and other very necessary services that have been cut recently, especially by this current administration, but actually systemically for a long time. We talk about a lot of different things in this report, and we want to highlight that connection to how people become houseless because of detention and deportation. We talk about how the targeting of a particular group of people goes all the way back to broken windows policy, goes back to the idea of sharecropping, even in that people in detention are paid very low wages and expected to then use those funds and pay back the detention machine in order to, sustain it and cut costs for GEO and increase their profits. We talk a lot about, as I said, those housing barriers that folks face throughout this report. And truly, our involvement started when we were called upon to assist a community of people in Aurora in some buildings that were being raided consistently. And perhaps a lot of you have heard of them, the CBZ or Zev Baumgartner buildings in Aurora. And because of that, a lot of the tenants that we were working with, workers, parents, folks that are very plugged into community that were very important and valuable to us, were ripped away from the community during that time. And that resulted in us visiting a lot of those folks in detention and starting a group within our campaign, Housing Not Detention, that specifically supports folks who are being impacted by this. We are also the home for a fund that is used for emergency rental assistance for folks who have been impacted by detention and deportation. And with that, we have been able to donate thousands of dollars to support various families in need, to support families in need of emergency shelter who were actively on the streets, and also to support former detainees who are struggling to be able to pay rent now that they've been released and have yet to receive their documentation. So it's a very critical fight. We are working hard to make sure that the community at large understands that connection. And because of that, we're very dedicated to this cause of shutting down GEO as well. As for the format of the report, something that differs in this report as opposed to the previous one is that we did begin to do data analysis in this report of the forms that were submitted. And so throughout the report, you see references to percentages regarding how many times a certain theme was mentioned throughout the 31 different submissions that we received since the release of the last report, all the way up until the creation of this report. So what we saw is that it laid out a wide variety of themes under the 4 pillars of medical concerns, living conditions, guard behavior, and food insecurity. So under those 4 pillars, and in that order are how many times each of those themes were mentioned. We then used thematic categorization to break those down into different groups and turn the qualitative data into something quantitative so that we could begin to understand the scale of an issue or how many times people were referring to it. What this does for this report is it really adds a lot of validity to the themes that we're discussing. And we are making sure throughout this report to highlight in each of the sections the top category as it was discussed by detainees. And in that way, we are accountable to the folks who have been working with us and revealing what conditions are like on the inside. So very proud to be part of that process. Throughout the report as well, it refers to an N value, as opposed to usually mentioning sample size. The N value in this case, in this report, is referring to how many times something was mentioned, because the way that the submissions worked is that there are some folks who went and visited the same person detained multiple times and therefore had multiple submissions under the same respondent. However, they were revealing different incidences of mistreatment or of poor conditions within the facility. And so we wanted to honor how many times each of those themes were brought up. We are very excited to see what this means in terms of being able to keep track of those changes throughout the reports as we move forward. We think that this is how we'll be able to also detect as certain conditions worsen or as certain changes take place within the detention center. So to be able to start tracking that with this data is very important to understanding what people are going through. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think I will pass it back to, oh, is it myself? Am I passing it back to?
Yeah, you can just continue. What we're going to do now is just go through each of these sections pretty briefly, and we're just going to highlight some things that stood out in this data analysis, new information or different information, or things that we were able to expand upon from the last report. So yeah, V, go ahead if you want to do the medical section.
Yeah, thank you. So for the medical concerns section, medical concerns were highlighted throughout the submissions 161 different times. So that is then the population per se of the number of times a concern was brought forward. Something else that's different in this report is we wanted to really highlight the words of the folks who are detained and the people visiting them. So each of these sections has a quote that comes directly from either a person detained or somebody who was visiting. And the medical concerns section starts with, I was diagnosed as pre-diabetic here. My feet are swelling and the doctor gave me different socks to wear. I have gotten the wrong medication about 2 to 3 times. One of the times I had an adverse reaction to the medication I got. I couldn't breathe. It felt like I was choking. As we continue into the report, the mention actually of having an adverse allergic reaction to medication prescribed while in GEO was something that surfaced multiple times. There was more than one respondent who was saying that they directly had a horrible adverse reaction to medication prescribed, which actually resulted in their hospitalization. The top theme that surfaced from medical conditions was regarding new diagnoses that people were receiving when they were in detention. This highlights the fact that detention conditions are having an adverse effect on people's health to the point where they are experiencing new medical conditions that they've never experienced in their life before detention. We talk about how the majority of those are physical conditions. Some of them are things like flu, uncontrollable vomiting, various things like that. As I mentioned, the adverse reactions to medication. And we talk about how some of those led to emergency hospitalization. In about 5 instances, people referred to hospitalizations. Then we also talk about how, mental health concerns don't receive necessarily the same treatment or attention. So while a few folks mentioned mental health conditions deteriorating while detained, we talk about how folks are treated or not treated. And that leads to the next section, which talks about the types of treatments provided in detention. By far, the number one idea for folks is that they are given some kind of medication if treated, and the medication tends to be a single dose of ibuprofen. So this can be used to treat a wide variety of conditions, which is incredibly problematic. Actually, we highlight later on how that has led to various lawsuits against this facility due to the fact that folks were being treated very minimally for more serious conditions. Things like, chest pain, body pain, again, uncontrollable vomiting, headaches, they are not able to receive further treatment, and this results in people suffering and having conditions that are not detected and deteriorate quickly. So if you go to the next page, we talk a little bit about that. We also mention just the very human response when we do talk about mental health. We talk about different feelings that folks describe while detained. They talk about feeling afraid, bored, insane, lonely, panicked, sad, and traumatized. They talk about how severe PTSD is exasperated by being detained. They talk about folks who are screaming throughout the night and never receiving treatment or support for that. We talk even about the strain that romantic partners feel because when one person is in detention, the other person tends to be facing a whole litany of obstacles while not detained, and this can result in tension between the two of them while they both have to navigate surmounting pain and grief through this process. In the next page, we talk about the lack of treatment for, especially for pre-existing medical conditions. So that surfaced in the sense of folks who even have medical proof of needing certain medications. They, entered with an understanding of what their conditions are. We found that in various cases, this was halted abruptly while they were in detention, and they were denied a lot of forms of treatment for those types of conditions. That even extended to the point where somebody was denied glasses who has needed glasses to be able to see, an elderly man, a senior citizen who, yeah, things as simple as that. And that's something also that is discussed in ICE's own policies as being an ADA aspect that they will provide and didn't. So here we have another quote. This person says that they have been having dental pain that has not been checked yet. It hurts to eat, and it also gives her a hard time to go to sleep. She also told me that there are a lot of people who are struggling with mental health issues. There are some women that will scream at night. She said that one of the women that screams is very, very sick, extremely pale and skinny. She said that when it was her time of the month, the woman that is extremely skinny, she doubles down in pain. On the following page, we discuss instances of improper medical response. This can be conditions that were denied medication, but additionally, things such as if an individual goes in to ask about a skin rash or persistent cough, they receive a psychiatric evaluation instead. And one of the new diagnoses that has been found to be, a pattern in GEO detention is actually psychological illnesses that folks have never had before, including things like schizophrenia. And some issues with that is those sorts of conditions and those labels can have an adverse impact on people's actual immigration case. So there's a lot of concern around that as well, and the fact that by denoting somebody as incapable of being able to continue pursuing, release or their legal case, that means that a lot of folks then have their immigration process halted or impeded because of those sorts of improper diagnoses. Additionally, it doesn't take into account, of course, the fact that the detention facility in and of itself is something that has a huge negative impact on mental health. So to blanket, claim that certain people have that condition is very problematic. And while they're doing that, you have folks who really do have anxiety, well documented for a long time, and other various mental disorders who do not receive support, do not receive the treatment that they were receiving on the outside. So then we have another quote there. For sake of time, I think I'm going to continue to the next page. So through the submissions that were brought forth, we did notice that in one of them, the person who was detained wanted to share with us their medical notes from inside detention. And we were able to see that one of the people who caused, the physician that prescribed medication that caused a severe adverse reaction that led to hospitalization is the same who has been sued for wrongful death of somebody who was detained as well. So we highlight that as well. It's incredibly problematic that somebody can be sued for wrongful death and 2 years later still be practicing. The implications of that are wide-reaching in terms of the quality of medical care that people receive, and the huge risk that they are put in. So at the time, this a lawyer during the lawsuit referred to the situation by saying that the person who passed, who was Calero Mendoza, he basically, Mr. Calero Mendoza, it says that the only care that he received in the weeks leading up to his death were from a low-level, entry-level medical provider who was not qualified for diagnosis, treatment, or medical decision-making. And yet we have the physician who was named in that lawsuit still actively practicing. In the next page, we go on to talk more about that lawsuit and previous incidences where people suffered under medical mismanagement of their cases. We talk about how another individual in 2017 died, Kamyar Samimi, in the detention center. We also talk about situations where somebody had their fingers broken when a guard slammed their door on their hand. Another had a leg amputated after they were being ignored for bed sores in the facility. Another died of a heart attack in 2012. So basically just pointing out that these facilities are not only incredibly harmful and uncomfortable, they're actually very deadly for a lot of people who go into them. And for this not to be receiving the kind of attention it deserves and for people to continue practicing is a huge risk to our community and just a horrible place for people to be put in, and clearly not with the mindset that they will receive proper care. Then we go on to talk about the various hospitalizations that were mentioned. And yeah, basically, this entire section really does highlight how folks do not receive proper medical care, how those seeking attention and support are denied or made to wait for a long time, while those who are not seeking support per se for psychological issues have their cases impacted by new conditions. We talked about, again, the huge amount of folks who receive new diagnoses while detained, and also about how the person that is supposed to be caring for the people who are in detention has a horrible track record, and we should consider the fact that this person is not fit to continue offering treatment to the folks who are in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, V. And what's clear here, and once the report is released, that'll also be clear, but the medical concerns section is the longest by quite a few pages, and that's because we did receive just a really high number of submissions related to that, and particularly with the outbreak of illness in December and in January, that was very relevant to these submissions as well. So I did want to just highlight a few things from the living conditions, which is really building upon the data from the first report. This quote says, "He sleeps next to a cold wall and the vents are always blowing cold air. Says lights are on 24/7 and television also, and they put the volume up really high. He doesn't sleep very well, usually stays up until around 3 a.m. reading the Bible until his body just gives in." We did highlight in this report the pictures, the hand-drawn pictures from the last report as well, which were shared with Casa de Paz. And those are from a man who was an architectural engineer in his home country and was able to give us a pretty clear idea of what it looks like inside. The extreme temperatures did come up again and again in these complaints, with people describing that it was either way too hot or way too cold inside of the facility, and that also depended a lot on the season throughout the year, or the time of day. And so that was interesting, but a lot of people do mention that they have to try to find additional blankets or jackets to keep themselves warm in those extremely cold temperatures. Another thing that is really relevant in this moment is the $1 per day so-called voluntary work program, which was mentioned quite a few times in the living conditions section of our complaint form. And people mentioned different, quote, opportunities for labor, including working in the kitchen and food service, doing laundry service, working in the barber shop, cleaning the dorm service, and one person did mention painting walls as a part of that work program. The people that work in the kitchen typically have to wake up at 3 a.m. for that job. And people are paid $1 per day for these so-called work opportunities. And yeah, we do mention and highlight that a lot of these people who are often legally barred from having lawful employment here in the United States for months, if not years, and have to navigate this immigration system just to be considered employable in this country. When they are in detention, they are exploited for that very same labor. They work for 13 cents per hour. And so it's a very interesting contrast, and it's important to highlight the lack of morality around that system. And also worth mentioning is the class action lawsuit against GEO Group, which came from people who are detained inside of this facility. And so that lawsuit remains ongoing. It was filed in 2014. And it essentially alleges that if people refuse to participate in this so-called volunteer work program, that they would be punished for that. And so as well alleging that people would have to clean their cells without pay, or entire pods within the facility without pay. And so this is a very clear connection between the complaints that we received more recently related to this $1 a day work program. And with the living conditions, it was hard to categorize where to put this volunteer work program. But we do feel like it's important to draw the connections between the history of sharecropping in this country, because a lot of people are working for $1 a day so that they can have a phone call with their loved ones. So if someone wants a 30-minute phone call with their loved ones, that costs around $5. So that's an entire week of work. We will get into food insecurity in this facility, but people will also work so that they can buy food from commissary. And so what they're doing in that system is that they're taking part in this voluntary work program and then being forced to spend that money on that same facility and giving that money to either GEO Group or other private corporations that make money off of the detention of these individuals. And then lastly, just some other themes that came up with living conditions is sleep issues, again, related to this extreme cold, often the temperature. And then people report being woken up at pretty odd hours in the night, either for medical checks or having to wake up really early to work in the kitchen, or just having to wake up at 7 a.m. or earlier to be counted. And these counts happen either at 4:30 a.m. or 9 a.m. or 4 p.m. or 10 p.m. So it can be pretty random. The medical conditions that V highlighted also contribute to this lack of sleep, as people are battling different mental conditions such as PTSD, or untreated dental pain, or the lights and TV being on all the time. It's not an environment that is conducive for people to feel rested in any way. And then lastly, with the extracurriculars, or so-called extracurriculars in this facility, this is a photo from the GEO Group's website. And this is the indoor recreation facility at Aurora GEO. And so people do mention a lot of oversleeping and general boredom that comes from the monotony of this being detained and trapped inside of this facility. And it's interesting that this photo itself is highlighted on Aurora GEO's website as an example of an extracurricular activity. But we have heard different reports of the privilege of being allowed to go outside being cut at any moment without explanation, or people that have not been outside for many months. And so those are some of the main themes from the living conditions complaints. And I will pass it to Andrea to talk a little bit about the themes for guard behavior.
Thank you, Ark. So for guard behavior, I'm going to go through it pretty quick. Like we highlighted, the medical concerns are really the majority of kind of what we receive, and the most concerning. Guard behavior, however, does take some portion of the concerns and the complaints that we have heard over the last few months. So for the quote on this, if any one person in the detention center does something wrong, they will punish us all. For that reason, they would take away everyone's access to the microwaves, tablets, access to phones, even for the small things. If people were verbally arguing, they would be put in solitary without access to anything except food. And so one of the biggest patterns that we really saw was the usage of solitary confinement. So a lot of people were put into solitary confinement for different reasons. The amount of time in solitary confinement is also a 15 allotted day solitary confinement. And however, that does not mean that GEO nor ICE actually stay within those timeframes. So we have heard somebody be in solitary confinement up to 3 months. There are also obvious concerns that come with somebody being in solitary confinement for so long. Um, there is a general, no, yeah, we can move to the next slide, sorry. So one of the other concerns that we have heard are really retaliatory hard behavior towards people in detention. So this is something that we have heard over the years, but that is still being reported. So um, guards using the restriction of things like the microwaves, the tablets, outdoor time as a punishment and retaliatory punishment towards folks in detention. There is one of the things that we do want to highlight is the amount of people and the number of times that people do refer to the treatment that they get from guards as being treated by guards like animals. So that is something that we hear being reported, and that is also something that as CASA we can also say that we hear when folks are already outside. So that is really kind of the biggest way that people kind of can compare it to when they're being released or when they're still in detention is they don't feel like guards inside look at these people like humans. They do not treat them like humans. They're being treated like animals, and it goes in the way that they use punishment, that they use solitary confinement as tools um, to punish our people. The other thing with the guards is they have mentioned folks on the inside have mentioned having their personal items being thrown away. And on the other end, we have heard, and this is I don't know if we can necessarily for this report talk about the increase of the abuse, verbal abuse specifically. But for sure, with talking to people over the last few years, and then seeing it here as something that is being reported, people are reporting that GEO guards are more abusive and in verbal ways. And that just goes to show that there's never been any really consequence for GEO guards in the way that they do treat people. And so there is no surprise to us that there is abuse being reported. The the biggest thing is a lot of the times the only access that they have is to food, and that is really because that's what they're required to, and that's just the bare minimum. So other than that, we talked about the living conditions and the importance even of having the access to tablets and how that kind of makes the day just go by. And so whenever you get these items taken away, it's for a very, very sole purpose. The collective punishment and the operational issues are one of the last things that get highlighted under the guard behavior. And so for collective punishment, people are talking about the fact that if anything happens, any disruption happens in the pod, then everyone has to pay the consequences for that disruption. And so if someone is even arguing about anything minimal, then now they're being taken away What is to point on this is that it's not just folks arguing and then that leads to consequences. It's the fact that we have 60 people to one pod with access to 4 toilets and 2 microwaves. And so it is almost impossible to not get into small arguments over whose turn for the microwave it is or whose turn it is to use the toilet. So these small disruptions cause collective punishment. And I think it's really important that we paint the picture of how the whole thing around living conditions and medical and just the pressure that folks are going on the inside then are also then leading them to punishment and to being taken away from different things that they might not actually be even involved in. And so this happens often. This is a cycle that also creates an inability for them to actually win their case if they're getting into these arguments within each other. And then just the access overall of actually getting to talk to their loved ones, to get through day by day. And so that these are kind of the conditions on that. And with that, I will pass it to Piper. Yeah, Piper.
Okay. Thank you all so much again. No, it's a lot, but we're, honored to be able to share a picture of what is really happening inside. One of the most widespread complaints that I've heard over the years I've been working on the conditions at this facility is about food insecurity, but it has gotten much, much worse and more widespread over the last year. So one example from a person who shared with us is that lunch was 1/3 of a cup of beans, 1/4 cup of canned corn, 1 to 2 pieces of lettuce, 1/2 piece of bread, and a baby spoon size serving of something unidentifiable, like a protein of some kind. When we broke this down, that's 198 calories, well below the minimum needed for health. Recommended by the FDA. An adult should receive a minimum of about 500 calories per meal for a minimum of 1,500 calories per day. So you can see how this places people into a position where they're often at near starving food conditions if they don't have access to outside funds, which is completely unconscionable. The people inside what they report about their food conditions and the amount of food they receive violates ICE's own policies regarding food service standards. It also violates the food safety and preparation requirements. Everyone who prepares food is a detainee inside the facility. There are no outside vendors who prepare the food. The training is very minimal, and the access to any kind of sanitary, gloves to cook with, making thermometers to make sure the temperature is correct. The people who are making the food have no control over how long it is between when they make it and when it arrives to a pod, which is another big opening for foodborne illnesses when things are not hot enough or cold enough to prevent the spread of bacteria. There's also many injuries that are reported from doing the cooking because people aren't properly trained. There's reports of burns or cuts in the preparation of food. And there's almost no variety in the food that people are served. That's one of the another major issue that connects back to medical concerns is that people aren't provided the diet that they need for certain medical concerns like diabetes or ulcers, and they're also not often provided the diet they need for religious or other reasons like being vegetarian. The menu consists almost exclusively of processed items, and you can see the menus that have been provided to Congressman Crow's office off and on for yourself to check that out. There's only 3 types of fresh produce that were reported to us: a lunchbox size apple, a small handful of baby carrots, and 1 to 2 pieces of lettuce that are provided. Those aren't provided every day, usually 1 to 2 times per week. The majority of the items that people reported to us are listed in the report. But one person shared with us that they hadn't had fresh fruit or vegetables, meaning not canned, not processed, for 8 months. The other thing we see is deprivation of food as a punishment and also a way to profit from people being inside. Oftentimes, guards would throw away people's commissary items or food that they had saved from a meal. And then on top of that, on top of having these periodic throwing away of all of people's items, no matter how long they've been in a cell or not, withholding food, like not serving the meal to an entire cell or pod. We've also documented that people who were too weak to receive their trays because there was an outbreak of illness in pods, other detainees were not, people who were detained were not allowed to get the tray and take it to that person, and guards also refused to take it to that person, threatening people's health. We also see guards using food as a form of social control, like a bag of chips for a whole day's payment for work, because there's only so many quote unquote positions in the $1 a day slots. Then guards will use food as a bribery to work. And they'll also place people into solitary confinement if they don't accept that food as payment and do the work. You can see here a graphic that lists out in a fist size. We've been asking people how big compared to your fist were the portions you receive. Around, people should eat, an adult should have around 24 fists of food in a day. But what most people are reporting inside GEO is about 15 and a half. So that again shows the food scarcity that exists inside the facility. We also see that this corporation is manufacturing hunger to maximize profits for its corporate partners who provide the commissary inside. Most people inside report that they need about $80 to $100 a week from the outside in order to be able to communicate with family members and supplement their nutrition. 16.7% of our respondents said that they couldn't afford commissary. So that's a huge amount of people who are, the only thing they have to eat is what's provided inside the facility. And oftentimes we see people who are detained, each purchasing an item and then combining the items to make a meal or to make several meals and sharing with folks who don't have enough, but they can't share enough to really sustain the caloric and nutritional intake of people who don't have someone on the outside. And the GEO Group uses hunger as a leverage to participate in their involuntary labor program because 22% of respondents mentioned food insecurity, that the food was not enough, and they're consistently hungry. So people are forced to run this facility at $1 a day, doing all the cleaning, cooking, and laundry, all while hungry. So we've included a graphic here of prices inside of detention and how many days someone would have to work in order to afford, for example, a pack of ramen, 3 days and 1 hour. And I'll go ahead and pass it to the next person on the list to talk about visitor perspective. I just want to sum up that this is not an accident, it's intentional. And they're using food insecurity for social control and to maximize their profits by not having to pay people a livable wage to maintain this facility.
Thank you, Piper. Yeah, I want to pass it to Alejandra to give us an overview of the visitor perspective, and then we'll close out with our demands and have a couple of minutes for questions.
Hi, everyone. So with the visitor perspective, I just wanted to quickly highlight, I guess, visitation goals. one of the immediate effects of when someone is incarcerated is the social isolation from their loved ones, from their support systems on the outside. And because of the nature of the immigration detention center, there's a lot of fear of loved ones going in to visit. And so, yeah, one of our goals is just a connection, and serving as a connection to the people inside, um, being their friend, just supporting them through what they need. Our second goal is acting as a resource bridge to legal resources and other support for families on the outside. As it's been mentioned many times throughout this press conference, um, resources aren't accessible to people who are detained, even the people who are outside their families. And so, yeah. And then the third goal is to uplift families' voices and the voices of the people inside, and involve them in our work. Yes. So visitation is intentionally fragmented and limited. On the north side, there's only about nine working spots for visitation. And on the south side, there's only 4 spots. There's been times, I think one time, one of the visitation spots on the south side was broken, so there was only 3 spots. And they have arbitrary rules. There's no real service to the families who are crossing borders. There's no real awareness of the lives that they hold um, when they're trying to visit people detained. And what I mean by that is that their visitation schedule starts, well, on the north side, depending on who you're visiting, it could start from 7 to 8 a.m. and then again from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And on the weekends, people start lining up as early as 5 a.m. outside in the cold. They'll be bundled up. They'll have their jackets, their blankets, and yeah. So, um, yeah. Um, for example, like they're also always late all the time. Like there was one time I was there for an 11 a.m. visit and it didn't take us until 12 p.m. And when I was asking them what was going on, they were like, "Well, it's not our fault. It's not my fault." And yeah, there was one time I went in, I signed up for my visitation, and I saw a woman on like who was waiting. She was waiting to sign up. And she came up while I was signing up, and I think they gave me the last spot because they told her that there were no more visitation spots anymore. And she was crying. She was telling them that she works overnight, that she's not able to visit her loved one often because of how much she works, and how the visitation schedule is set up. And she was only able to make a visit because I gave her my spot. And so yeah, like I think she had been there waiting for about an hour to sign up, and they never talked to her. The only time that they talked to her was to tell her was that there was no more spots left. And so yeah, I think that's all I have, but I'll pass it on to Piper.
Thank you so much, Alejandra. And yeah, I just want to highlight that a lot of the content of this report was possible because of these visitation efforts through Aurora Unidos CSO, through House Keys Action Network Denver, and also through Casa de Paz. So these volunteers that are able to connect with these individuals and uplift their stories and also connect them to resources, that was very imperative for us to be able to write this report. So I just want to very quickly highlight our demands related to this campaign, and then we will have a couple of minutes for questions. Broadly speaking, our campaign demands that this facility is permanently closed and that the people who are trapped inside here are freed and that they are not transferred to another immigration detention facility. And importantly, that the land on which this facility stands is returned to the people of Aurora and East Denver for a purpose that benefits those communities and neighborhoods and individuals. We have pretty extensive demands for our congressional delegation, which we plan to deliver this report to them as a part of our ongoing effort to hope for accountability from the congressional delegation as well as state elected officials and the Aurora City Council. And then we have some calls to action for community, which is largely uplifting this report and the content inside of it and spreading the word about the existence of this facility and demanding that accountability from our elected officials. And then as well volunteering with one of our partner organizations and getting involved to get to know people who are detained here and to uplift their stories and realities. And yeah, once again, just want to thank everyone for coming to this conference. Thank you to the Down GEO Campaign and all of the individuals and organizations that are a part of this campaign. This report was only possible because of the courage of people who are detained inside of this facility and people who have been released and are courageous enough to share their testimonies and their analysis so that we can better understand the conditions inside here. So yeah, the largest thank you is owed to those individuals. And I want to open it up for any questions at this time. Thank you so much.
And I think we're a small enough group that if people just want to come off mute. Oh, I see Benito. Go ahead, Benito.
Hi, in Mexico, there's a lot of coverage of reports that the Mexican consulate hasn't represented Mexican citizens, and Vizcarra has come out and said that's not true. I was wondering if this panel could comment a bit on that. And then if I could just clarify a bit more too, some of the accusations are just that Mexican nationals who are detained at the Aurora ICE facility are saying that they haven't received representation from the consulate. The consulate has denied that. I'm just wondering if you can talk about what kind of consulate services, whether they're Mexican nationals or from other countries, whether they're receiving those services, or if there's any problems along those lines.
I can speak to that unless someone else wants to. Okay. So, I can't speak for every single person detained inside the facility. I can say that when family members that are our members have reached out to the consulate for defense. So each consulate does a ton of different things. And what I'm going to speak to is specifically the consulate who is in charge of visiting people inside of GEO and providing some services to them, has gone to visit people, is there regularly, almost daily at the facility, and has facilitated, the notarization of documents that people need, things like that. That said, the Mexican consulate does not provide legal services to anyone in the United States. So representing is a little bit of a stretch. That's not something they've ever done or claimed to do. And I think, if people do have someone detained and they've reached out to the consulate and they haven't heard from them, we would be very interested to know that. But in my experience, when the consulate has been contacted, they have connected with loved ones. And here in Colorado, I can't speak to other states, and help facilitate some of the things that they can help with that people need. Other questions about any sections of the report? Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Jen. So I'm curious about sort of the mechanics of the contract and the campaign. Specifically, the deciding body there is who is the deciding body there, and in terms of the campaign, what has the response been so far?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So for the contract itself, it is a contract between the Department of Homeland Security and GEO Group. So ultimately, those are the two deciding entities. However, there are a lot of other avenues of pressure that we are interested in pursuing and have pursued in the last year and some change, which is pressure from elected officials on the local level, the state level, and the federal level. So we have met with Representative Crow quite a few times, as he is pretty involved in this facility and in the oversight process, generally speaking. From community, the response has been extremely positive to our campaign. We have grown significantly, like I said, in these last 4 months, but really in the last year and a half, as people around the country are becoming more aware of the injustices of the Department of Homeland Security, broadly speaking. People have been pretty excited to learn that this contract is going to expire, and that there is a group of individuals that has been working at preventing that renewal. So hypothetically, like Aurora City Council, there are some potential avenues that they can take to prevent DHS and GEO from signing a new contract on this land. And then as well with any increased pressure from Representative Crow or Senator Bennett, that would assist our cause as well with the pressure aspect of it.
Thank you.
I'll just add, we have seen other facilities have their contract not renewed around the country. So it's not, even though it seems maybe, like, I think the underlying question there is how possible is it, right? And we have in the first Trump administration and also towards the tail end of Biden seen for-profit corporations have their contracts interrupted by efforts just like this one. And the common ingredients there have been the multi-level of elected officials that Art mentioned being standing together and really raising a lot of questions, community groups being able to present that they're not doing a good job, and the public outcry. So, it's between now and October is the big press. So now is the time for people to really lean into the listening project, to documenting with us and to meeting with these officials. That's a really great question. Other questions? I think one other thing we would like to highlight is just our deep concern that because of these conditions, the lasting harm that we see caused to people who are trapped inside may result in another death soon. This administration's death rate inside of detention facilities is unprecedented. And we also suspect that the facility is likely overcrowded on a regular basis right now. So not only to prevent the contract renewal, but also just to prevent further harm, it's very important and very timely that people get involved. I don't know if other folks have a few things that you want to highlight before we close out, if there's no other questions from folks.
Hi, if I may quickly, one of our members was detained at GEO and he had been sick and asking for masks, and this was denied. The only medical help he was ever given was maybe 1 or 2 ibuprofens. Even though the family begged to drop off like medication for him, they wouldn't allow that. And the reason I bring this up, right, where Piper, you're mentioning that this is going to lead to more deaths, is there's deaths that can and are possibly happening that we just can't trace after they've been deported. This person that I'm speaking about, they were removed, and after being removed out of the country, the family couldn't find him for, I believe, a week or so. And turns out it was because when he stepped foot in his country, he was so sick from pneumonia that he had to be urgently hospitalized. And so the family couldn't find him, and he couldn't call the family because he was near death at that time. And the last place he was in the hands of GEO after being sick since, I believe, December with close to no medical help. I believe he had pneumonia. I'm unsure of what else was happening with him, but just want to point out, right, that these conditions, what they're doing to these people, doesn't just stay within GEO. It moves with them psychologically, and also like what happens when these people are just dumped, so to speak, by this immigration system.
I was wondering before y'all go if you could talk a little bit about the upcoming facilities or the possibility of the Hudson and the Walsenburg facility, just any concern there, any comment there?
Um, I can comment on it. We asked CASA went and drove on the 10th of February up there. And we witnessed a sort of delivery situation. And so it looks like there is already plans of really opening that up. You don't drop off supplies and deliver supplies in this, you're really getting ready to reopen. There was a gray truck with Texas plates that was guarding the front of kind of where you pass the Hudson facility, signage. And so what our assumption on that is that A, not only are they really getting ready to open that up, but B, the real pressure behind really opening this facility up is just how overcrowded the Aurora facility is. One of the reports that we got in the last month from somebody coming out of GEO, and they were a cook in the facility, was that in December they were definitely making 1,600 meals. And so you just have a lot of people in one facility, and that puts a lot of pressure into really wanting to open the facility in Hudson. And what we know is that it's within enough distance that we believe they will release. And I think Piper also has a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I just want to highlight two things. One is that the state of Colorado got out of these facilities because they had a terrible track record. The ones owned by CoreCivic, GEO, we've already covered, right? And because they weren't caring for people, and they weren't preparing people for release. Nothing has got changed with those companies other than their names since they were state of Colorado facilities. The second thing I'll highlight is that's one of the things we really have learned as a movement that is trying to abolish these types of facilities, is how important it is to rip them down. Because if you leave them up, somebody will try to come back and fill them. And then the third thing I wanted to mention is that the facility in Aurora is overcrowded, not because it needs to be, but because the federal government is dedicated to re-detaining people who are seeking asylum, who have done absolutely nothing wrong in their cases. It's a false filling of the facility in order to justify opening other facilities. And it has nothing to do with people's own immigration cases, the reason that it's so full. And then the last thing is, I know that there's a move from some of our partners who are working on those other campaigns to organize at the local level, and also to put pressure on the real estate agents, the owners of the land currently, to not go ahead with these contracts. And it's not too late. It hasn't all been written yet. And I think we are not running those campaigns, but we are collaborating really closely with people who are in Hudson and Walsenburg, and providing some of this technical expertise and experience. But if you live near or in Hudson, your voice is desperately needed on this issue. There's only so much anyone who doesn't live in a place should or can do. And then also, if you're in Walsenburg or Colorado Springs, there are really healthy campaigns there, and we really encourage you to connect with them. If you can't find them, you can always message us on social media, and we'll be happy to make that connection. But you know, Coloradans don't want these facilities and are very clear about that. The jobs that they provide are horrific. The other part of the reason there's operational issues at GEO is because guards are quitting all the time. The pay seems good when you sign up, but the work itself is devastating. So there's a lot of people of color who work in the facility, but they turn over all the time. Most people 6 months, max a year, and then we never see them again. So these aren't good jobs. They aren't jobs that allow people to thrive. And we want to see these facilities transformed into something that will provide people dignified work and healing.
Thanks.
Okay, if there's no other questions, maybe you could close us out, Ark.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Again, thank you to the people that worked on this report, and most of all, thank you to the individuals who are currently detained at GEO Aurora and had the courage to share their stories with us. And yeah, we hope to shut down this facility as soon as possible, ideally in October. And thank you all for supporting our campaign and the work that we do.
And we'll be sending to you all a copy of the recording and the report. And then the rest of the press won't receive that information until, I think we said 3 p.m., something like that. So you guys get a little bit more time with it than your colleagues for being here today. That's our thank you. If you have any other questions, you can reach out to us. We're happy to do interviews. All of the organizations that work on this report over today or tomorrow. So let us know if you need that.
Thank you all so much. It was really informative.